today has been an interesting day in the world. I would imagine there's a few people sitting watching the news at the minute. Not a lot's happened in the past couple of hours. Just to give a very brief overview of Product Tank and where it came from. It started in a pub in London, a meetup for product managers. It grew a little bit. They now have 3 conferences around the world. All of them sell out immediately. 1,600 in San Francisco, 800 in London, and a new one in Singapore. There are also 180 product tanks around the world now. There is a Slack group which you can join with, I think, 16,000 people on there from various businesses. It doesn't get too noisy, and you can throw a question in there and you will get answers. People are very, very keen to help. I'll let people take all these. Quick shout out to the companies who help, so Place Changes. Seb isn't here, that's his startup, and Simply Brightside, run by Mr. Murray over here. Quick word, in fact, you can have your slide there as well if you want to sponsor this. We are looking for sponsors, so if there's anybody interested, you get a 5-minute slot at the start to talk about whatever your business is. And at the minute, it will cost beer and pizza. Quick word of housekeeping, the toilets are out there, out the door, if you need to go. I don't know exactly where, I did find out last month, but forgot. I got wrong last time because this was too grim, so I've changed it for a nicer image. If you hear the fire alarms, there's nothing planned for tonight, so do have to leave. Obviously, 21st century, there's no smoking allowed. And also advertising, as well as running massive conferences. Mind the Product also run mini conferences. The next one is MTP Engage in Manchester. There's some very, very good speakers lined up. The tickets are pretty much sold out already. It's the 8th of February, tickets on sale now, and it is in Manchester. Their meetup like this gets around 200 people now. They start like we did. There's just some more 6 keynotes, some breakout tracks. We also run, as part of Mind the Product, some training for product management training. I'm one of the trainers. These dates are confirmed now, so in March in Manchester, myself and 3 of my colleagues from Mind the Product will be delivering training on all things product management. And for tonight's talks, obviously grab a drink. The order was switched around, if that's okay, so Jules is going to step up first.
You got my name wrong.
Is it? Oh, yeah, because you got married. I do apologise.
How dare you?
I left when you got married. Everybody's still the same. So I'll hand the floor over to Jules to talk about localization.
All right, thank you. Hello, everybody. Okay, so I'm Jules, and not Sunderland. I did get married in May, so it's actually money. But I've been working at Turnitin for the last 6 years, and for the last 3 of those, I've been managing the product writers and also the localization workstream for a product. Prior to that, I looked after the translation for our websites, and that was in 19 different languages. So I've been asked here today just to talk mainly about my experiences and learnings as I've been working at Turnitin in localization. And this is an outline of some of the things that I wanted to cover. So I want to talk first of all, quite quickly, just about how Turnitin rapidly developed from being a US-centric organization to becoming a global leader in the educational market. And then talking about the globalization process and what it actually means, what does it constitute. I wanted to talk very quickly about when to localize. It is a big investment, so there's quite a few key indicators that I think that people can use as a guide. So a lot of them very self-evident, just wanted to touch on those. And then specific to my experiences that I've actually had at Turnitin, I just wanted to talk to you about the challenges that I faced when I was looking at content development and how we overcame those challenges. And just wanted to end on talking about some language services and tools that I particularly found very useful along the way. And certainly, if you're looking at localization large scale, certainly worth noting. I believe we are going to have questions at the end of the presentation, otherwise we might just have them when Dan's done his. Okay. So, just, it's missed a slide. Right, okay. So, Just wanted to include this graph really just to show it's a representation of how rapidly Turnitin grew between 2011 and 2017. So this is just over the course of 6 years. So on the graph on the right, you can actually see the red is showing where we were actually at 2017. The blue is showing the different international regions of where we were in 2011. So whilst we were starting to gather some influence in international, at the time we only had about a third of the market of our Turnitin revenue was actually from international growth. By 2017, that had increased to almost 50%. So we're very much on par with the US, and it's still growing. So you saw there how we were actually starting to get influence in international markets, and that's very much what globalization is about. Now, the globalization process is split into two main parts. So localization, which is what I'm going to be talking about mostly, is very much the process about getting your product or your service ready so that it's suited for a particular market. So it's tailoring it to certain market needs. And then you've got internationalization, which is on the other side, which is basically the foundation for localization. So it's very much, you need to internationalize your product or service to accommodate localization. A good example at Turnitin, for instance, is when we started translating into 19 different languages, we needed to make sure that the product was actually able to accommodate the different language sets. So we needed to have it set up so it would actually accept all the different dates and times that you get across the different time zones. So that's what internationalization is all about. So I mentioned earlier on that I wanted to talk to you about when to actually localize, and these are a few key indicators that I'm going to quickly run through. So first of all, market value. It's looking at what opportunities do you actually have out there. You may have some tenders or you may have some national initiatives that you might want to watch out for, and that might be the right time to actually localize to maximize those. Market growth. If you've already got some users on board, it's a very good indicator if you're seeing that growth in time that you might want to start investing in a bit more localization in those particular areas. And then there's the level of market maturity. Is the market actually ready for your product or service? I remember an example back at Turnitin, which you'll recall, Will, where we were looking at the North African market and we were going there to do some training. And we had certain obstacles such as the actual internet connection over there is very poor, so that created quite a few obstacles. And then when you've got an online product, it obviously gives you those barriers. The level of English proficiency. Now for me, this is quite an important one. I think sometimes it's overlooked. So whereas you may have a particularly large market that's high in English level, it has a high English proficiency, you may also have a smaller market that's not so proficient in English. They're not so ready to actually consume English content. So where do you put your budget? You're probably more likely going to want to localize for that smaller market, even because they don't have that proficiency in English. A good example for us is our Turkish market. So whilst it's still a fairly big market, we do have larger markets. But if you look at sort of the Scandinavian countries, Netherlands, you've got Sweden, Denmark, a lot of those countries, they have a lot of educational initiatives and people are using English in the schools. So there's a high proficiency of English. Whereas with Turkish, if we look at our statistics for our websites, we can see that nearly 100% of that market are actually accessing Turkish only. They're not accessing the English content. And then finally, there's contractual and legal obligations. So whilst you don't need every single one of these indicators present, some of them might outweigh others. Okay, so you've made the decision to localize. It's important to note that it's not just about translation. So I think a lot of people think that, okay, we're going to localize, let's just send the English out there and get the translations. Now I've got some examples here that show how some large brands have fantastically got it wrong over the years. I mean, we've got KFC, 1980s, moving into the Chinese market. They translated their strapline, it's finger licking good, and it actually came out as eat your fingers off. So you can understand that didn't go down too well. You've got Big Mac, which translated into French is gros mec. When you translate it back again, it's Big Pimp. And then in Italy, you've got tonic water, which translates to toilet water. So you can understand it's not just about sending off the English for translation. You must understand your market. It's all the little nuances. It's what the messaging is, how the messaging is going to actually resonate. And whilst I've got some quite humorous examples here, you can see how it can actually damage an organisation, and it can take a long time to come back from that. Thankfully, at Turnitin, we haven't really suffered anything like this. At worst, we might have had some translations that probably didn't flow too well, or a button that might have been mislabeled, but thankfully we've kind of got over that. So now I want to talk about some of the challenges that I had when I was embarking on localization. And this was probably about 5 years ago when I started looking at localization proper at Turnitin, and I was amazed at the lack of commitment. You saw in the graph how we were starting to make an impact in international, but it was still very much US focused. And I think it was basically a re-education. It was about trying to get people to understand the importance of localizing those markets and what we needed to do to tap into those opportunities. It was very time consuming and costly. So at the time we had in-house translators. They were very difficult to manage. We had to have them on contract, so you had to have them on a retainer. So it meant that there was a long lead time because you only had one translator. And then we had the engineering overhead. So we had a lot of disgruntled engineers because basically the process to extract the language strings from the product was so convoluted. By the time it went to the translators, came back again, then the engineers had to update the files. It took a long time. And it also led to release bottlenecks. So because the product was set up so that everything had to ship out at the same time, it meant that we had to wait for every single language string before we could actually release a product or the actual a big feature. And we had inaccurate and inconsistent translations. And this was largely due to the fact that we'd translated at different stages, we'd lost track of what we translated into which language, things were out of date, we'd had different translators working on different content, so there was a lot of inaccuracies there. So now I just want to talk about how we kind of overcame those and what kind of practices and processes we put in place to, at a later stage to solve things. So the first thing was establishing an owner. We needed a champion. We needed somebody to go out there and do a bit of good PR and basically just get the message out there that we're localized and this is what it's about. And I started off by talking to lots of different teams, finding out what their different pain points were, empathizing with them, and trying to work out solutions for those teams. The next thing was to look at the languages that we had. So we had 19 languages. That's a huge amount to look after. And it was getting impossible to try and manage the content development for all those languages at the same time, especially when there was just myself in the localization team. So I looked at doing language tiers, and that was very much based on usage, and that helped me prioritize how I would stagger the language releases. Now, feature flags is something that we're starting to look at in our product. So we're already using it in development day to day to make sure that to section off different features if we're not ready to ship everything together. Why not use them for the languages? So that's something I'm hoping the engineers will incorporate in the year coming up. And then I looked at the content itself. So we'd been translating bulky manuals, sometimes 60 pages each, and we work a lot with integration partners. And those integrations especially, they're updating all the time. So no sooner had we translated a manual, it was out of date. So it was a case of, do we need to translate the whole manual? And when you look at it, there's probably only 1 or 2 pages that are relevant to that particular market. So it's understanding, okay, what's most important for each market, and then just getting that translated. Something we've started doing recently is looking at different medium we can use. So rather than doing documentation, we're thinking about videos. Video seems to be the thing of the moment. Everyone likes watching videos. So we started doing some video production in Camtasia Studio, and we built it with localization in mind. So we've got them animated. They're very short, 5-minute snappy videos, and we've got subtitles, so it makes it a lot easier and it's a lot cheaper to manage. QA was something that was really lacking from our process. As I said, we only had in-house translators. We didn't have anybody else checking content. So we moved to using a language service provider. And with their service, what we have now is we have a translator and then we have an independent reviewer. Secondly, we started talking to the support teams. We've got all these support representatives whose experts on the product. They're the perfect people to check the technical accuracy of the translations, and they've got the language skills. So we started now getting them to spot check certain content, and that's been a great help. Now, something that, a bit of a tip, if you're going to be pushing out a new product or a large feature, put it in a beta period and basically get your customers involved, because if it's in beta, they're probably more likely to appreciate that there might be some issues, and it also gets them to engage with the content and feedback. And then finally, and I will talk about this in my last slide, we started using a translation management software, and we started using them about a year ago, and they've helped drastically with the automation of our service. So I mentioned language service providers, and I've just put a few points here because I think it's worth mentioning. They've got a lot of advantages. So the one thing, they've got a pool of translators, which is extremely handy if you've got a lot of translations at scale. And especially if you've got a lot of projects that are running concurrently, it means that they're doing all the sourcing for you, so it's valuable. And they're content specialists as well, so they're trained in different areas, in medical content, legal content, marketing content, even technical content. So I've said they're scalable. However, I would recommend as well that if you're using a particular translator, that you keep using that translator on your account, because they will start building more and more knowledge of your product or service over time. And that leads to greater translation consistency. There's multiple service options available. So they offer legal services. You might have heard of sworn translation services. So sometimes we've had to use them. Our customers have mentioned that they wanted documentation that was done by a sworn translator, so it's got that stamp to say that that person's been certified. They offer that. They offer expedited services for a small premium. So if we've got anything critical, that we know we can push it through the service. But they also have a lot of production staff on basically available around the clock, which is really good for us because they've got offices around the world. And especially what's easy for me, as I mentioned, I was the only person working in this localization team originally. They've got dedicated account and project managers. So if anything goes wrong with the translations or I get some poor feedback, I know I can leave it in their hands and they will go and they will sort that out. And there's a 100% guarantee on translation satisfaction. So they will keep retranslating until we're happy with the translation. And I found it to be a lot more cost-effective as well than in-house translators. Certainly at large scale, but I would also argue at small scale as well. And that's mainly because once you start to use them, you get to negotiate your rates. So we've got a rate card, we know what we're getting charged every single job. But we've also recently been able to negotiate small language strings. Originally what they would have to do is we'd have to have so many words before we could ship off a job, whereas now they will just translate any small strings for us, which is great because the engineers can just push them through as necessary. And this is my last slide. And I just wanted to talk a bit about translation management software. Now, this is something we implemented a year ago, and I'm starting to get all the engineering teams using it. It's been phenomenal in helping the automation of the translation requests. So now what we have is we have an API that we use. Basically, the engineers will just run a script on our product. It pulls out the strings. It puts it into this tool. It's contained in the tool. And then the translators will actually access via the tool. So everything's in the one area. And they will do all the translations, the reviews. Everything will take place in that one area. They also have access to the glossaries and the style guides, so the translators have all the tools necessary to give them any additional context that they might need and will help them with their translations. Now, they also have access to translation memory. And translation memory is basically your common terms or sentences that have been translated before. So what it will do is it will offer up suggestions or matches, and that will then help take down the cost as well, because we can leverage the translation memory and there's not as many word count in the actual quotation. And finally, it radically improves translation quality because it accommodates workflows. So I mentioned we have a translator and then we have a reviewer, so it accommodates that. It also accommodates a third verifying workflow, which allows us to send it on to support members or somebody else who might have language skills to help with that. And we have an in-context editor, and I'm very excited to be looking at getting this implemented in the new year. I haven't unfortunately been able to get engineering resource on this. But with the in-context editor, what it will do is it will allow the translator to see the page that they're translating on in English side by side with the page that they wanted to translate. So as they're typing in their translations, they can actually see how it's going to look on the page. So it's giving them that vital context that they would miss if they had, say, a spreadsheet or a document. Okay, so hopefully you found that informative and
We can do the Q&A session with pizza,
okay.
if that makes sense.
Brilliant.
Thank you very much.
Awesome. Hi everyone, I'm Dan Dalton. I'm product manager at SalesCycle. You can find me at DMan on Twitter for all things product, NFL and burger related. So I just want to paint the picture essentially of who we are, just to give you a little bit of context. So obviously the theme of this is global products. So I just want to give you some context of how global SalesCycle truly is. So who we are, we're a behavioural marketing product, founded in 2010, currently employ about 175 people globally. Offices in New York City, Singapore, Paris, Brighton and the sunny Durham. So what we do is, our mission is to shape and support the conversions that exist within every customer journey. We do this by processing data of every action that happens across our clients' websites. So that would be products that you viewed, site interactions, basket value items, all that good stuff. And all of the actions that happen on that site, if it qualifies against the campaign that our clients use to meet their objectives, so things like recover abandoned sales, so if you abandon a basket, we might send you a reminder. If they want to encourage their newsletter sign up, we might ask for a newsletter sign up, offer promotional codes, and if they want to drive on site conversions, we might show you social proof and information like trends, who's looking at this, price drops, that sort of stuff. So who we do it for? We're currently deployed on over 700 individual websites across some of the biggest brands in Europe. There's some quite big names on there. The most interesting thing about our client list is not the size of the brands or the size of the list itself, it's the variety across verticals. We operate on every conceivable verticals, from pharmaceuticals to online gaming to retail to fashion to travel, you name it, we're probably on it. So SalesCycle is a truly global product serving its users on a massive scale. If there's anything you can take away from this, it's probably that. So just to give you an idea of the scale, we process over 200 trillion unique data points per month, which gives us a lot of range to play with new product ideas. So world domination is such an ugly phrase, I prefer to call it world optimization. A quick Google search for Eliezer Yudkowsky, you will find he is a rational writer who opposes artificial intelligence on the grounds he thinks it is a direct threat to humanity, so he probably really hates the Terminator movies. But this quote really sticks with me from the terms of who I am, who our company is, because it represents our values now, as well as who we want to be in the future, because as every business does, we want to grow aggressively and substantially and sustainably. But we also truly value and believe what our product does, because the personas that we have as a product team and as an engineering team could be, you are a husband or a wife searching for the ideal anniversary present for your partner. We want to make sure that you see all of the content that's relevant to you, the best ideas based on things you might have bought in the past, things your partner might have looked at, things you might have looked at, or you might be someone who's on British Airways or Virgin Atlantic looking to get those all-important flight tickets home to see your family for Christmas. Inevitably, life will get in the way of that. It could be a call, it could be a child wanting your attention. We will want to remind you to get those tickets when you eventually leave. So this leads me to the inevitable question of how does a product with such global responsibilities keep moving forward? So essentially what I want to do here is, from a high-level approach, the principles or commandments, as we call it in our product team, of how we want to approach these type of tasks in developing a product that has such global reach across every visitor that hits all of our client sites across every conceivable vertical. So the first commandment, know thy users. From everything that I've just said, I've probably really given this away, but I am not a client relationship manager or a CRM for a global retailer living and working in Singapore. Because of that simple fact, I probably couldn't tell you that email and SMS aren't a highly engaged channel within the APAC region. I probably couldn't also tell you that instant messages is the main channel of that, with WhatsApp being one of the most popular with an 80% current market penetration within Singapore. On top of that, probably couldn't tell you that 40% of the population of Singapore bought an item within an app within the last 30 days. So to give you a view of that scale, 2.25 million people, if they spent £30 in the last 3 days within an app, that's £67.5 million. Within that, over a year, that's the best part of £1 billion. If I miss out on that market purely because I don't know it, I'm going to be as upset as this guy from Westworld. Sorry if no one gets that, but you probably should watch it. So, because of all of that, I've missed out on that massive market purely because I don't understand the users. But a simple one-dimensional view is not understanding. So what can you do? Market research, customer interviews, focus groups, journey mapping, metrics and KPIs, sales shadowing, product observation, competitor analysis, production testing. Production testing being if you are like Basecamp and you really just want to release things and see what happens, then go for it. But essentially, the more effort you spend on getting to know your user, the world and their needs, the clearer your path to solving their problem it'll be. But what is that path? You've understood the users, you've understood their need, but developing a deep understanding of your target users will guide you to their pain. Sorry. So, essentially all product ideas can be traced back to a single problem. SalesCycle was originally founded as a cart abandonment solution, but we are now fast approaching becoming a data-driven marketing cloud powered by artificial intelligence, machine learning algorithms to effectively optimize a website. Airbnb was 3 guys who were struggling to pay rent because that's where they live, San Francisco, Silicon Valley. It's really expensive. But they put mattresses on their floor and rented that space out for people who were attending conferences in the local Palo Alto area. Still probably wouldn't want to stay on that mattress, but it would probably be a lot comfortable now. It's worth the best part of $35 billion. So the success or failure of almost always come back to the understanding of a problem or its users. If I don't know who you are and what your problem is, I'm probably not going to be able to solve it the best and most efficient way. Someone could probably tell me, or I could tell you, that my problem is I'm not a great runner, but you telling me that you should just run more probably isn't the best way to solve that problem. So if you find market fit, growth will appear, and new problems will present themselves will inevitably lead to more growth. But what if my path is over 40,075 kilometers wide? So fun fact, that's the circumference of the Earth, so really what I'm saying is what if my problem is a global problem? You probably aren't no winner at that point. But this is when prioritization becomes more increasingly important. So speed to market based on needs versus wants and delight us. Having an understanding of the market that you're in, the markets that you want to be in, the functional, legal, marketing and technical requirements of delivering that into the market allows you to have a much more focused view of what you can get to market quicker and deliver value for your users. So allow me to tell you about a path that was recently trodden. This really isn't another slide deck about GDPR, so don't worry. For those of you who might not have seen GDPR, it was something that happened earlier in the year. So, SalesCycle is a marketing product. We send emails and SMS, all based around marketing and retargeting. Send a lot of them. Across our top 30 clients, we send nearly 7 million emails per month across over hundreds of millions of users across all of the websites that we're on. Probably one of the most high usage products that you've never ever heard of. A solution for GDPR was needed pretty much or else, because as a company that sends high volume remarketing emails, if we don't have consent to send them, the lights aren't going to stay on for very long. So we started development on a solution for GDPR a little bit later than we would have liked, because as everything normally does with the roadmap, stuff gets in the way, things come in, stuff that you have to build. So we adopted the ABMVP approach, which is the absolute bloody minimum viable product, which was the bare minimum we had to release to meet a hard deadline, because 25th of May was approaching, we really needed to get something out. So what we eventually released was a solution fit around the very simplified version of the problem that is GDPR. Can I send this communication or not? So we built a solution that simply checked, you're a user that hits this website, have you been here before, have you given us consent before, can we send you an email? Where that path took us was to the marketing permission service. It's now live. That is now live on over 200 of our individual client websites, which is adopted across 6 continents in countries that do not or have absolutely no need to consider GDPR requirements, because it's a problem everyone has. Data protection is a hot topic at the moment. We've grown it from a retention tool to a revenue generator. We were originally giving this out for free to clients because it was just purely a case of, we can't manage your consent, we can't send emails, we're not going to earn any money. We're now selling this actively to clients as a way that we can manage your consent as a fully managed service. And it now boasts a suite of functionality such as tailored journeys based on device type. If you're on a mobile device, chances are you're probably not going to like a pop-up. So we've brought functionality to market which embeds content directly into clients' websites, which takes development resource off you. It's a nicer user journey. It's a much less intrusive way to ask someone, can I send you something that might or might not we want to receive. Import-export functionality, which led to a fully managed service offering. So we turned a solution which was necessary to keep the business functioning as it was into something that we're now selling as a managed service to clients, as an end-to-end solution to manage all of your marketing consent for the use of your entire marketing suite. So getting this to market quickly allowed us to allow our users to shape our own product to their problems. We didn't give a solution to fit a problem, we found a problem and built a solution to fit it. So the inevitable build trap is a nice graphic that I'm sure all of you are aware of. So you've got the solution or a problem to a user pain. On the surface, it's a nice simple solution to that problem. Underneath, it's all the effort that it takes to get that to market. It's the discovery, the ideation, the validation, the cost of commercial spend of all of that development, marketing, onboarding, launch, testing. So essentially, we must lay one brick at a time and take one step at a time. The way we approached a very simple problem and turned that into a global product that's now used across some of the biggest brands in Europe is we knew our users, we followed the North Star, which is our problem, we built less and learned more.